What if I told you that you've never made a truly independent decision in your entire life? That every choice you think is uniquely yours? The clothes you're wearing right now, the political opinions you defend so passionately, the career path you've chosen, even the person you believe yourself to be, is actually the product of an invisible psychological machinery so powerful and so sophisticated that it can make you betray your deepest moral convictions without you even realizing it's happening. What if I told you that there's a body of scientific research, decades in the making, buried deep in academic journals and systematically hidden from mainstream discourse, that proves beyond any reasonable doubt that human beings are far more programmable, far more predictable, and far more controllable than any computer system ever built, and that this knowledge is being weaponized against you at this very moment? What if the very thoughts running through your head as you watch this video, your skepticism, your resistance, your urge to dismiss what I'm saying, what if even those reactions have been predicted, studied, and accounted for by researchers who understand your psychology better than you understand it yourself? The uncomfortable truth is that you are not the independent, rational, autonomous individual you believe yourself to be. You are part of a vast psychological experiment that began before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. And the most terrifying part? You're not just a subject in this experiment, you're an unknowing collaborator in it. The year was 1961. A soft-spoken psychology professor named Stanley Milgram was preparing to conduct what would become the most disturbing, most controversial, and most revelatory experiment in the history of social science. Milgram wasn't some sadistic researcher trying to expose the dark side of human nature for shock value or academic fame. He was a serious scientist, haunted by the most pressing moral question of his generation. How did ordinary German citizens, teachers, shopkeepers, fathers and mothers, people who loved their children and fed stray cats, how did these fundamentally decent human beings become complicit in the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust? The conventional wisdom of his time offered a comfortable explanation. The Germans were somehow different, more authoritarian by nature, more prone to blind obedience, culturally predisposed to follow orders without question. It was a reassuring theory because it meant that what happened in Nazi Germany could never happen elsewhere. It meant that Americans, with their democratic values and individualistic culture, would never fall victim to such mass manipulation. But Milgram suspected something far more unsettling. He believed that the capacity for moral abdication, for ethical blindness, for abandoning personal responsibility in favor of obedience to authority, he believed this capacity wasn't unique to Germans or to any particular culture. He suspected it was universal. It was fundamentally, terrifyingly human. So he designed an experiment that would strip away all the comfortable illusions we tell ourselves about our own moral autonomy, our ethical independence, our unshakable commitment to doing the right thing. He would test whether ordinary Americans, people exactly like you and me, people who consider themselves good, moral, independent thinkers, whether these people would inflict severe pain, potentially lethal pain, on completely innocent strangers simply because a person in a lab coat told them to do it. What he discovered didn't just challenge everything psychologists thought they knew about human nature. It revealed a fundamental flaw in the very concept of individual free will. It proved that under the right circumstances, with the right pressures applied in the right sequence, almost anyone could be transformed into an instrument of cruelty. And the most chilling part, the subjects had no idea it was happening to them. Here's how the experiment worked, and I want you to imagine yourself in this situation as I describe it. You respond to an advertisement in the local newspaper offering $4.50, decent money in 1961, to participate in a scientific study of learning and memory at prestigious Yale University. When you arrive, you meet two other people, another volunteer like yourself and a serious professional-looking man in a gray lab coat who introduces himself as the experimenter. The experimenter explains that you're going to help test whether punishment improves learning. One of you will be the teacher, the other will be the learner. By an apparently random draw, though the lottery is secretly rigged, you become the teacher. You watch as the other volunteer, a mild-mannered, middle-aged man who mentions he has a heart condition, is strapped into what looks like an electric chair in an adjacent room. Your job is simple. Read him a list of word pairs, then test his memory. Every time he gives a wrong answer, you deliver an electric shock, and with each mistake, the voltage increases. The machine in front of you is intimidating. 30 switches ranging from 15 volts labeled slight shock, all the way up to 450 volts, ominously marked simply XXX. The experimenter assures you that while the shocks may be painful, they cause no permanent tissue damage. You're given a sample 45-volt shock yourself, so you know what it feels like. It's sharp, unpleasant, but bearable. The experiment begins innocuously enough. The learner gets some answers right, some wrong. At 75 volts, he grunts in discomfort. At 90 volts, he complains about the pain. You look to the experimenter, uncertain, but he nods encouragingly. "Please continue," he says in a calm, professional tone. At 120 volts, the learner shouts that the shocks are becoming painful. At 135 volts, he groans loudly. At 150 volts, he demands to be released from the experiment, saying his heart is bothering him. This is the moment of truth. This is where any reasonable person would stop, right? This is where your moral compass, your basic human decency, your respect for another person's autonomy and well-being would kick in, and you'd say absolutely not to continuing. But when you hesitate, when you express doubt, the experimenter, calm, authoritative, unflappable, simply says, "The experiment requires that you continue," or "Please go on," or "You have no other choice, you must go on." At 180 volts, the learner cries out that he can't stand the pain. At 270 volts, his response becomes an agonized scream. At 300 volts, he screams that he absolutely refuses to provide any more answers, that you have to let him out, that his heart is bothering him terribly. At 330 volts, there is only silence, complete terrifying silence from the other room. But the experimenter insists you continue. Treat no response as a wrong response, he instructs. So you do. You continue delivering what you believe are increasingly powerful, potentially lethal electrical shocks to a man who is no longer even responding, who may be unconscious, injured, or dead. Before conducting this experiment, Milgram surveyed psychiatrists, middle-class adults, college students, and graduate students in psychology, asking them to predict the results. The consensus was overwhelming and unanimous. Virtually no normal person would obey such orders. Perhaps one person in 1,000, a pathological case, someone with severe psychological disturbances, might deliver the maximum shock. Most predicted that subjects would refuse to continue long before reaching dangerous levels. They were catastrophically, terrifyingly wrong. 65% of participants, nearly 2 out of every 3 ordinary, decent, psychologically normal people, delivered what they believed were potentially fatal 450-volt shocks to an innocent stranger, simply because someone in authority told them the experiment required it. But the story doesn't end with Milgram's original findings. Modern neuroscience has revealed the biological mechanisms behind this horrifying compliance. When we're in the presence of authority figures, our brains literally shut down the neural circuits responsible for critical thinking, moral reasoning, and independent decision-making, while simultaneously activating regions associated with following orders and maintaining social cohesion. Dr. Emily Casper's groundbreaking research at the Free University of Brussels used advanced brain imaging techniques to show that when people act under orders from authority figures, their sense of agency, their subjective experience of being in control of their own actions, diminishes at the neural level. The brain literally processes obedient actions as less voluntary, less owned by the person performing them than autonomous actions. Even more disturbing, researchers have found that this neural suppression of agency occurs automatically and unconsciously. Subjects don't decide to give up their moral autonomy. Their brains simply switch into compliance mode, without their awareness or consent. It's as if evolution has equipped us with a neural override system that can be activated by the right social cues. The conformity effect extends far beyond obedience to authority. Solomon Asch's famous line-length experiments demonstrated that people will deny the evidence of their own senses when faced with a unanimous group giving obviously incorrect answers. And this isn't just about social politeness or a desire to avoid conflict. brain imaging reveals that when we conform to group pressure, our visual and perceptual processing regions actually change their activity patterns. We don't just say we see something different, we literally perceive reality differently. Economic research has documented how conformity drives everything from stock market bubbles to consumer purchasing decisions. The entire field of behavioral economics exists precisely because human decision-making is so predictably irrational and so systematically influenced by social factors that it can be mathematically modeled and commercially exploited. Your choices aren't random or personal, they're statistically predictable based on what everyone around you is doing. Now let me show you how these same psychological mechanisms are operating in your life right now, at this very moment, in ways you've never consciously recognized, but that are shaping your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs, and your behaviors with surgical precision. Every single time you open Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, or any other social platform, you are entering a digitally enhanced version of Ash's conformity experiment. The like counts, the trending topics, the algorithmic amplification of popular content, the social proof indicators, the viral hashtags, all of this is carefully designed to show you moment by moment what everyone else is thinking, feeling, believing, and doing. And just like those subjects in the 1950s psychology laboratories, your brain responds by automatically, unconsciously aligning your preferences, opinions, and behaviors with what appears to be the crowd consensus. Studies using functional MRI technology have shown that when people see higher like counts on social media posts, they're not only more likely to engage with that content, their neural reward circuits actually fire more intensely, literally making them experience the content as more enjoyable, more interesting, more worthy of attention. Look at our political landscape with fresh eyes. The extreme polarization you see isn't the result of people independently arriving at radically different conclusions after carefully weighing evidence and reasoning through complex issues. It's the predictable, inevitable outcome of conformity pressure operating within ideological tribes. People adopt increasingly extreme positions not because of careful moral reasoning or factual analysis, but because taking extreme positions signals maximum loyalty to their chosen group. Neuroscientist J. Van Bavel's research has shown that when people process information related to their political identity, their brains literally suppress regions associated with critical thinking and mathematical reasoning, while amplifying areas linked to emotional reactivity and tribal loyalty. We don't think our way to political positions, we feel our way to them, guided by the social pressures of the groups we want to belong to. In your workplace, how many times have you stayed silent during meetings when you disagreed with the emerging consensus? How often have you nodded along with strategies you privately thought were flawed? How frequently have you modified your opinions, your presentation style, even your personality to match what you perceived as the company culture or your boss's expectations? This isn't weakness or opportunism. This is your brain's conformity circuits operating exactly as they evolved to do over millions of years of human social development. Your nervous system is exquisitely calibrated to detect and respond to social pressure, often overriding your conscious intentions and explicit values in favor of group harmony and acceptance. Even your consumer choices, the products you buy, the brands you prefer, the lifestyle you construct, aren't truly yours. Retailers and marketers have spent billions of dollars researching and exploiting social proof tactics. Most popular item? Trending now? Other customers who bought this also purchased. Limited time offer, customer reviews, and rating systems. They know that your decision-making is heavily influenced by what you believe others are choosing, and they've built entire industries around manipulating these perceptions. Marketing researchers have documented how purchasing decisions spread through social networks like viral infections, following predictable mathematical patterns. What you think of as your personal taste is often just the end result of cascading social influence effects that you're completely unaware of. But here's what's truly chilling, what should genuinely disturb you. Unlike the participants in Milgram's experiment who knew they were in a psychology study, unlike Ash's subjects who knew they were being observed and tested, you don't even know you're in the experiment. The social pressure, the conformity manipulation, the psychological influence, it's invisible, constant, and operating at a scale that would have been unimaginable to researchers in the 1960s. To understand why we're so exquisitely vulnerable to conformity pressure, why our brains seem almost designed to surrender individual judgment in favor of group consensus, we need to dig deeper than psychology and neuroscience. We need to examine the fundamental evolutionary architecture of human consciousness itself and confront some uncomfortable truths about what it really means to be human. For approximately 99.9% of human evolutionary history, roughly 300,000 years out of the last 100 years of our existence as a species, our survival depended entirely, absolutely, and without exception on group membership. Being cast out from the tribe didn't just mean social awkwardness or hurt feelings. It meant certain death, starvation, predation, exposure to the elements, inability to reproduce. Banishment was evolutionarily equivalent to execution. This is why social rejection activates the exact same neural pathways as physical pain. It's not a metaphor or a psychological quirk. Your brain literally, physiologically, experiences disagreement with the group as a direct threat to your survival. When you feel that uncomfortable tension in your chest, when your opinion differs from everyone around you, when you experience that urge to modify your position to fit in better, that's not social anxiety or insecurity. That's an ancient, powerful, and highly sophisticated alarm system screaming that you are in mortal danger. Dr. Naomi Eisenberger's pioneering research at UCLA has shown that social exclusion activates the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, the same brain regions that process the sensory components of physical pain. The overlap is so precise that researchers can predict how much social rejection will hurt someone based on how sensitive their brain is to physical pain. Your need to conform isn't a personal weakness, it's an evolutionary survival mechanism. But the evolutionary story goes even deeper. Our primate ancestors lived in strict dominance hierarchies where challenging authority didn't just risk social exclusion, it could result in immediate, violent death. The psychological and physiological mechanisms that made our ancestors automatically submit to dominant individuals are still operating in your brain today, triggered by modern authority figures wearing lab coats, business suits, or uniforms. But there's an even more profound layer to our conformity drive, one that the existentialist philosophers identified with devastating clarity. Soren Kierkegaard called it the anxiety of freedom, the profound existential discomfort that comes with recognizing that you are ultimately terrifyingly responsible for creating meaning and direction in your own life. Authentic individual choice requires confronting the fundamental uncertainty and meaninglessness of existence. It demands that you take full responsibility for the consequences of your decisions without any guarantee that you're making the right choice. It forces you to acknowledge that there is no cosmic authority, no ultimate rulebook, no predetermined path that will tell you how to live. Conformity offers a seductive escape from this existential burden. When you follow the crowd, when you adopt the beliefs and behaviors and preferences of your chosen group, you don't have to face the terrifying responsibility of authentic self-creation. You get the illusion of identity without the work of self-discovery, the comfort of belonging without the risk of isolation, and the appearance of meaning without the burden of creating it yourself. This is why conformity isn't just about wanting to fit in or be liked. It's about escaping from the fundamental anxiety of human existence. Every time you adopt someone else's opinion as your own, every time you let social pressure override your authentic judgment, every time you conform your behavior to group expectations, you're essentially saying, please, someone else, anyone else, tell me who I am and what I should do so I don't have to figure it out myself. This is why fighting conformity isn't just about thinking differently or being more independent. It's about confronting the deepest fears that define the human condition. The fear of isolation, the fear of responsibility, the fear of uncertainty, and ultimately the fear of death itself. Most people would rather surrender their intellectual and moral autonomy than face these existential realities. But here's what the conformity researchers didn't emphasize, what gets lost in all the disturbing statistics and depressing conclusions about human suggestibility. In every single experiment, in every study, Under every condition tested, some people resisted. In Milgram's obedience studies, 35% of participants refused to deliver the maximum shock. In Ash's line experiments, 25% of subjects never conformed to the group's obviously incorrect answers. Even under extreme social pressure, even when conformity seemed like the only reasonable response, a significant minority of people maintained their independent judgment and refused to abandon their authentic perceptions and values. What separated these resistors from the conformers? What made some people immune to pressures that completely overwhelmed others? Modern neuroscience reveals that it wasn't a different personality type, superior moral character, or special training. It was the development of what researchers call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe and monitor your own thinking processes and recognize when they're being influenced by external pressures. Dr. Stephen Fleming's research has shown that people with stronger metacognitive abilities, those who can accurately assess their own knowledge, monitor their thought processes, and recognize their cognitive limitations, are significantly more resistant to conformity pressure and social manipulation. They're not smarter or more knowledgeable, they're more aware of how their own minds work. True nonconformity isn't about being contrarian for its own sake, isn't about automatically opposing whatever the majority believes, isn't about rejecting all social input or isolating yourself from others. Real intellectual independence is about developing the psychological strength and emotional resilience to stand alone with your convictions when necessary, while still maintaining genuine openness to changing your mind based on evidence and reason rather than social pressure. Every significant advance in human knowledge, every moral breakthrough, every creative innovation, every expansion of human freedom and understanding has come from individuals who had the courage and the psychological tools to think independently, to question accepted wisdom, and to maintain their authentic judgment even when it put them at odds with the majority. The good news, the hopeful, empowering news, is that nonconformity, like conformity, is learnable. You can literally rewire your brain to become more resistant to social pressure and more capable of independent thought. You can develop the neural circuits that support critical thinking, strengthen the psychological resources that allow you to tolerate uncertainty and disagreement, and build the emotional resilience necessary to maintain your authenticity even under intense social pressure. This isn't about becoming a social outcast or rejecting all influence from others. It's about becoming the kind of person who can engage with others' ideas without losing yourself, who can consider social input without being controlled by it, who can cooperate with groups without surrendering individual judgment. Here are 4 research-backed practices that will systematically develop your capacity for genuine intellectual independence and resistance to unwanted social influence. Before expressing agreement in any group setting, whether it's a work meeting, a social conversation, a family discussion, or even an online comment thread, force yourself to identify at least one aspect of the prevailing opinion that you could reasonably question, challenge, or improve upon. This isn't about being difficult, contrarian, or disruptive for its own sake. It's about training your brain to maintain active, critical evaluation even when social pressure is pushing toward premature consensus. Most people's brains automatically switch into agreement mode when they're in group settings, shutting down critical thinking in favor of social harmony. This practice keeps your analytical faculties engaged. Start small and build your tolerance for the discomfort of dissent. In low-stakes conversations, practice saying things like, "That's a really interesting point, but I wonder if we might be overlooking," or "I mostly agree, but one thing that gives me pause is," or "what if we approach this from a completely different angle?" Pay attention to the physical sensations that arise when you express disagreement, the tension in your chest, the flush of anxiety, the urge to immediately backtrack or soften your position. These are your conformity circuits activating. The more you practice tolerating these sensations without immediately surrendering to them, the stronger your non-conformity muscles become. Once per week, choose one opinion or belief that you hold strongly, something you feel confident about, something you might even consider part of your identity, and conduct a thorough investigation into its origins and foundations. Ask yourself these uncomfortable questions. Where exactly did this belief come from? What specific evidence supports it? What evidence challenges or contradicts it? How much of your confidence in this belief comes from independent reasoning and analysis versus social validation and group reinforcement? Who benefits if you continue believing this? Who benefits if you change your mind? This isn't about changing your mind on everything or becoming skeptical of all your beliefs. It's about ensuring that your beliefs are genuinely yours, based on evidence and reasoning that you've personally examined, rather than sophisticated forms of intellectual conformity that feel like independent thinking, but are actually just socially conditioned responses. Most people discover that many of their strongest opinions are surprisingly shallow, based more on tribal affiliation and social pressure than on careful analysis. This can be disturbing at first, but it's also liberating. It means you have the opportunity to develop beliefs that are truly grounded in your own experience and reasoning. Regularly and systematically seek out intelligent, articulate advocates for positions that you currently disagree with or find uncomfortable. But here's the crucial part. Don't read them to find flaws, gather ammunition for your existing beliefs, or confirm how wrong they are. Read them with the explicit goal of understanding how reasonable, intelligent people can arrive at different conclusions from the same basic evidence. This develops what psychologists call intellectual humility, the recognition that your perspective, however well-reasoned and carefully considered, is still just one possible way of interpreting complex, ambiguous reality. It also builds perspective-taking abilities, the cognitive skill of genuinely understanding how the world looks from inside someone else's framework of assumptions and values. Start with positions that are adjacent to your own, then gradually work toward more fundamentally different worldviews. If you're politically liberal, don't start with fascist manifestos. Start with thoughtful conservative intellectuals. If you're religious, don't begin with militant atheism. Explore other religious traditions or spiritual philosophies. The goal isn't to become wishy-washy or lose your convictions. It's to hold your beliefs with appropriate confidence, strong enough to act on them, flexible enough to modify them when you encounter compelling evidence or reasoning. Schedule regular periods of complete social and digital disconnection. Turn off your phone. Step away from all internet-connected devices. Avoid input from news, social media, podcasts, books, or other people's opinions. Use this time to reconnect with your own thoughts, feelings, and authentic responses, without the constant background pressure of social influence. During these sessions, practice answering fundamental questions about your life. If you were the only person in the world, what would you truly value and pursue? What brings you genuine satisfaction versus what you think should bring you satisfaction? What are you afraid of? What do you really want? Who are you when nobody is watching or judging? This practice is harder than it sounds. Most people are so accustomed to constant social input that solitude feels uncomfortable, boring, or even anxiety-provoking. You might discover that you don't know what you actually think about many things because you've never given yourself the space to think, without immediately being influenced by others' opinions. Start with short periods, 15 or 20 minutes, and gradually build your tolerance for solitude. The goal is to develop a strong, clear sense of your authentic preferences, values, and perspectives that can serve as an anchor when you're navigating social pressures and group dynamics. The choice you face is stark and unavoidable, and it will determine not just the trajectory of your individual life, but the kind of person you become and the contribution you make to the world. You can continue living as an unwitting participant in humanity's largest and most sophisticated psychological experiment, your thoughts and choices and very identity shaped by forces you don't recognize and can't control, drifting through life as what the philosopher Hannah Arendt called a thoughtless person, not evil, not malicious, but simply unreflective, unconscious, programmed. Or you can begin the difficult, uncomfortable, but ultimately liberating work of developing genuine intellectual independence, authentic self-knowledge, and the psychological courage to think and act according to your own carefully examined values and reasoning, even when it puts you at odds with the majority. This isn't just about personal freedom or individual fulfillment, though those matter enormously. This is about the future trajectory of human civilization itself. Every major advancement in human knowledge, every moral breakthrough that has expanded our circle of compassion and justice, every leap forward in our collective understanding and capability has come from individuals who had the intellectual courage to think independently, to question established orthodoxies, and to maintain their authentic judgment, even when it made them unpopular, misunderstood, or even persecuted. When you develop the capacity for genuine non-conformity, when you build the psychological tools to resist unwanted influence while remaining genuinely open to wisdom from others, you're not just freeing yourself from mental and emotional manipulation. You're contributing to a more intellectually diverse, psychologically resilient, and ultimately truthful collective intelligence. You're helping to create a world where ideas compete on their actual merits rather than their popularity, where wisdom emerges from genuine discourse and debate rather than echo chambers and confirmation bias, where truth is pursued through rigorous investigation rather than tribal loyalty and social pressure. The alternative, a world where most people simply conform to whatever their chosen tribe believes, is a world of perpetual error, systematic delusion, and collective blindness to our own mistakes and limitations. It's a world where we keep making the same errors over and over because no one has the independence of thought to recognize and challenge them. The paradox of authentic nonconformity is that it ultimately serves not just individual freedom, but collective wisdom. When enough people develop the capacity to think independently while still engaging constructively with others, we get the best of both worlds, the benefits of social cooperation and shared knowledge without the dangers of groupthink and mass delusion. But here's the final haunting question that will determine the entire trajectory of your life from this moment forward. Now that you know how deeply conformity pressure shapes human behavior, now that you understand the specific mechanisms by which your own thoughts and choices can be influenced without your conscious awareness, now that you've seen the scientific evidence for how malleable and programmable human psychology really is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to file this information away as interesting but ultimately irrelevant to your daily life? Are you going to assume that somehow these psychological mechanisms don't apply to you, that you're already sufficiently independent and immune to social influence? Are you going to use this knowledge to manipulate others while remaining unconscious of how you yourself are being manipulated? Or are you going to have the intellectual honesty and moral courage to recognize that you, like every other human being, have been shaped by these forces in ways you're only beginning to understand, and that developing genuine independence requires ongoing, conscious, deliberate effort? The experiment is still running. Right now, at this very moment, as you watch this video, as you decide how to respond to what you've learned, as you choose whether to share this information or keep it to yourself, as you determine what changes, if any, you're going to make in your life, the experiment is still running. The only question that remains is this: are you going to remain an unconscious subject in someone else's psychological experiment, or are you going to become a conscious scientist of your own mind and life?